Right, this is Sarah Duncan interviewing Nancy Blount-Smith for the Sandy Creek Park Oral History Project. And this is July 13th, 2005, and we're at the Sandy Creek Park Visitor Center in Athens, Georgia. All right, did I pronounce your name right? Blount part?
It's Blunt, actually.
Blunt, okay, excuse me, Blunt.
It's all right.
All right, first of all, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have a degree in biology from Greensboro College in North Carolina. And all my life I've been involved in educating children about the natural environment through the Nature Center movement, which was created in the mid-'60s by a man named John Ripley Forbes, who created the Natural Science for Youth Foundation. And a nationwide movement of community nature centers began out of his efforts and that foundation's efforts. And Sandy Creek Nature Center in Athens, Georgia was one of those nature centers that was influenced by his philosophy. And I grew up in that profession. When I graduated from college, I immediately began as a curator of education with the Greensboro Natural Science Center and Zoo in Greensboro, North Carolina. And then went to Los Angeles and worked as an assistant director for marine education at the University of Southern California Sea Grant program, and developed educational materials for the purpose of meshing the idea of marine science to inner city children in Los Angeles area in interdisciplinary fashion, through English, through math, through social studies. These curricular materials were based upon oceanographic and marine science principles, and they were written out of a grant for Sea Grant and incorporated into Los Angeles Unified and Los Angeles County school districts there for children who mostly had never seen the ocean by the time they were in their teens. Wow. So it was very effective. And then I came to Athens to direct Sandy Creek Nature Center in 1979.
Okay, and so you hadn't lived around this area until 1979.
79,
that's what drew
right?
You here. Yeah.
Right.
I was going to ask something about that. It looked like there was quite a bit of turnover in the Nature Center management before you came here. What was that like coming into that environment in a new Nature Center? And
I was fortunate because I had a supervisor, the director of the Greensboro Center, who was a political genius.
Okay.
And he was also willing to share an awful lot of his personal philosophies about how to effectively manage group dynamics. So I owe it to him that I was able to walk into Athens, Georgia, into the Nature Center that was $8,000 in the red, that owed the school district and the city and the county government's money, and had a staff of CETA workers and no director.
Wow.
So the CETA was, of course, temporary federal funding. That it was an ineffective program that was canceled shortly thereafter. But the Nature Center was drawing upon support from the school district at 50%, the city at 25%, and the county at 25% for its operating expenses. And, of course, there were 2 different fiscal years, and there was a private nonprofit board of directors calling themselves Northeast Georgia Nature Center Incorporated, a private nonprofit group that had a very different idea, each and every one of them, about how nature centers need to be managed, and who really didn't know which way to turn. So I think they hired me out, they interviewed me on the phone in my office in Los Angeles. And I think on the basis of something they thought I could mend that way, they hired me to come in. And I took it as a challenge and came.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody else that had been hired as the director had that expectation in mind, that it was going to be sort of a web of human dynamics that was going to be difficult to smooth out. And it was not difficult because all you had to do was come in and be friendly and understand everybody's point of view. Of course, the fiscal year business was a nightmare because you constantly had to go here and appeal to the mayor, you had to go here and appeal to the county commissioners, and then you had to go here and appeal to the school district, to the superintendent.
Yeah.
And then you had to appeal to your own board of directors, who had a budget of their own. which was minimal at the time, but it was still a budget.
Yeah.
And they still were in control.
Yeah.
And they could tell me what to do. And so could the commission chairman, and so could the mayor, and so could the school superintendent. So what you had was 4 bosses.
Uh-huh. And did they always want to do the same thing?
No. No.
I
Not
didn't
at all.
think so.
No, but they were all reasonable people.
That's good.
They all had their hearts in the same place that all the rest of us had our hearts in. We wanted the place to be effectively teaching environmental principles to young people so that we could continue to live on this earth.
Yeah.
We could continue to breathe the air and drink the water,
Yeah.
is the bottom line.
Yeah.
So everyone thought that was a very lofty principle to pursue, and it was just a matter of playing mediator, I suppose, putting people together. And I had other people on the Nature Center board that were that ilk too, who liked to put people together toward a common goal.
Mm-hmm.
And together, a bunch of people captured a dynamic and went forward, and it was successful.
That's great.
So I was just put in a place where I could do that. There were a lot of people who were capable of that, who joined forces and pushed, and people who were community leaders who you never really heard from. They're behind the scenes, and they're connecting this person and that person, and never recognized for that.
Mm-hmm.
People like Mary Ann Hodgson,
Okay.
who was at the time a sustainer on the junior league. Her husband was in the insurance business and banking business, and she was a very influential leader in this community, but enjoyed being that way behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So she very quietly put things together so that they would flow smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
It was amazing how people like that worked.
Mm-hmm.
And there were others, of course, too, who did. So it was a collective that was able to cement the relationships so that we could go forward. And in 1980, a proposal was submitted. It was sold to the board of directors first. It came from the board of directors, and it went to the county government, and that was not without a great deal of preliminary setup.
Mm-hmm.
Going to the mayor and talking to him about this idea. Where do we need to go? Going to the school district, talking to board members, talking to the superintendent. Where do we need to go with this nature center? Getting everybody's ideas, getting everybody's input, because if you hadn't done that, it would have never happened.
Yeah.
Everybody's input went into this. Everybody was recognized for it. And the county took the nature center. Of course, we know they were going to do it before the proposal was ever submitted, but that's how it had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it happened that way. It happened beautifully. The county took the nature center. And in the meantime, they were building this Sandy Creek Park.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened ultimately was that I was assigned, of course I was the director of the nature center, so the county took me, and that was convenient for them because the park had to be opened.
Yeah.
The first 3 phases had already been completed at Sandy Creek Park, and there was pressure to open the park, and they needed somebody to run it, so I was it.
And when did you officially start with the park? Do you remember?
It was kind of funny because in 1980, most of that year, I was working most of my time in this area.
Okay, I see.
And I was still paid by the county as the county school district. We still got input from all that. And we had a contract with the school district at that time, too, for services. So we knew exactly, the school district knew exactly what it was paying for. And, excuse me. Hi, you better. So the upshot of the arrangement was that I was working at the park and working side by side with George Chandler. He was the builder as the Public Works Department was building, using inmate labor to build it. I was working with him as far as recreational operations concerns and hiring staff and buying equipment like mowers and things like that to begin operations. So the two of us worked side by side, and I was still paid the Nature Center salary. Nothing had changed that way. And then when I became officially a part of the county government's budget, as far as personnel went, and salary, and in July 1st of 1981.
Okay.
And then in October of that same year, the park officially opened to the public.
Yeah. You mentioned that the park was built using prison labor. What was that like, working with the prison labor and the prisons themselves?
Well, George Chandler could talk about that a whole lot better than I can, I'm sure. George was ultimately responsible for negotiating with the architect and the Soil Conservation Service because it was a 50-50 agreement.
Yeah.
And George was under an enormous amount of pressure to build a park with virtually no help and not very much money to build things, and no personnel. He had to use existing personnel to build this park, and of course no one had any experience doing that. So the infrastructure was put in with inmate labor with a person who was assigned to George Chandler. His name was Fred Smotherman, and he took inmate labor and built the infrastructure, i.e. plumbing. Mm-hmm. And there were problems with that because there wasn't a whole lot of money and there wasn't any expertise except George, who could lay roads and who could do that and supervise the building of the subcontractors. He did that. But as far as using inmate labor and the supervision of inmate labor, there were a number of people who were put in positions where they didn't have the resources or the experience to do what they had to do. Mm-hmm. And part of the result of that was that, the first year, for example, the first deep freeze we had up here, all the pipes burst and we had geysers going up all over the park. So there was a great deal of repair that had to be done for the infrastructure, and then there were many modifications operationally that had to be made, which is fine, and you expect that.
Yeah.
But it was a charge for George Chandler at no extra expense that probably cost him at least 50% more time than he had ever had to devote to anything. Yeah. And he can speak to the details of that, I'm sure, and would be probably be delighted to do so. But George just let everything roll off. I mean, he was amazingly peaceful about the whole thing, at least in front of me. And it managed to happen.
What was your involvement in those first few months?
Mostly coming up with a budget for the first year of operations, knowing that it was going to open to the public whether anybody liked it or whether it was ready or not. Yeah. Of course, it wasn't, but we had to open it anyway because there was a lot of pressure from the fishing community to open it up to let people come in with their boats and fish. It had been stocked with... let's see, what did they stock it with? They stocked it with bass and bluegill and catfish. Mm-hmm. And people were just chomping at the bit to come up and fish. So the county, of course, wants to bend to that pressure to get that monkey off their back. So they said, okay, you will open this park. This park will be dedicated and opened on this date, and that's the way it's going to be. So what I had to do was come up with a budget, and I had, of course, to develop policies for their approval, and I had to develop an operational procedure for their approval, and a mission and a goal, and I had to create a whole department that included not just this place, but Sandy Creek Nature Center and the Greenway between them that was already under construction. Well, not under construction, but it was a concept that, of course, Charles Agar had come up with in a long, long time ago in the late 60s, and had students coming out with master plans for this greenway system. And Walt Cook and Alma Walker, who were both on the Nature Center board, had, of course, were the impetus for the Nature Center becoming involved in the instrumentation of that first leg of the greenway, which ended up being Cook's Trail between the park and the Nature Center. And that was already a movement that was not stoppable. And of course, nobody wanted to stop it. Everybody wanted it to happen. But all of those dynamics were involved in the first year's operation, and I had to come up with all that and create the department, its policies, its staff, its everything.
Yeah.
And I was handed a big wad of keys and said, "Here, make it happen." Literally.
And about how much time was that between making it, someone handing you the wad of keys and the park's opening?
Well, there was a lot of time in there for knowing it was going to happen that way. Maybe 2 or 3 months anyway.
Wow.
It was time enough to find out what I needed to find out in order to do it. And I wasn't proud. I was going to find out from people who knew. And some of them weren't even from the state of Georgia. I had to find out how to do and why to do, and I leaned an awful lot into the federal government for that, for the National Park Service, because this is a resource-based park. And a resource park has principles upon which it must abide in order to be successful and preserve not only public recreation services that are outdoor related, but to preserve the environment which is designed to protect. So I knew I had to do those things. And it was not a difficult thing to do. And had plenty of time to do it initially.
Yeah.
Of course, there were things you learned along the way, but you just have to get enough to get it started.
Yeah.
And then you can change as you need to.
What did this area look like? Maybe you could just kind of describe for me what the park looked like when, both when you first saw it and when the park actually opened in October of '81.
It was a well-kept secret. For the first 2 phases of development, I didn't know anything about the county government or what they were doing. I really didn't. That was totally unknown to me that this was being built up here.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yeah, I didn't know.
Even when you were working down at the nature center, it just didn't even.
They didn't talk about it.
Huh.
They didn't want anybody to know about it.
Yeah.
Well, because then the pressure comes.
Yeah.
Well, at least I suppose that's my best guess at it. I didn't know what the park looked like beforehand. I could pretty much describe it based upon the previous landowner's comments to me, and I sought him out because I wanted to know what it looked like before it was a park.
Yeah.
It was a farm,
Yeah.
a huge farm owned by a man named McIntyre and his family. And there was a swamp where the lake is right now. And, of course, Douglas Sailors gave me a perspective on that, too.
Okay.
He was grandfathered in because his farm was right there and part of his land was condemned and taken. Of course, everyone was paid. But during the condemnation process, some of their land was taken away for the park, and of course the fence went up and all that. But talking to those people gave me a pretty good perspective of what it looked like beforehand, and the only difference really in the fields and there's improvements, but there were a lot of fields, and with, of course, you're interspersed little coveys of trees and little oases in the middle of the fields on field edges and where fences were and things like that. Probably not much different than it looks today.
What about when
Except there was a lot of topsoil that isn't there anymore. Get into that. We won't talk about what happened to the topsoil, but anyway.
That doesn't sound good. What about when the park first opened in '81?
When the park first opened, there was dedication, of course. And during that dedication, the lake was named for Cecil W. Chapman, and the park was officially named Sandy Creek Park. And there was festivity and cheese and punch and all that stuff, and all the muckety-muck politicians came out in their 3-piece suits to sit and roast in the sun. And the first 2 phases of development had been completed at that point in time. The federal government Soil Conservation Service, which is now the Natural Resources Conservation Service, same outfit, different name, and probably different emphasis too. This was Site 10, the third and last in a series of 10 planned dams, and the third and the last was designed for recreational purposes as well as flood control, irrigation, all that kind of thing. But all that was explained during the dedication, and the federal government's role in that, financially and otherwise. And all the facts of the history of it came out at that point in time. And there was an Upper Oconee Watershed Association.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, God, I'm getting the name wrong.
Was it the one
Little
that-
Sandy Creek Watershed Association.
Oh, okay.
And that group was instrumental as a volunteer group in convincing the county and pushing the paperwork through the Nixon administration and all that to get the grant going, to get it finalized.
Mm-hmm.
And Cecil Chapman, of course, was the district conservationist here in Athens. And because of him, it happened.
Yeah.
You know, he pushed it through personally, and he and Jim Holland worked together to get it done. And their persistence was the reason it happened. Holland, Chapman, and the Little Sandy Creek Watershed Association.
Mm-hmm. What do you remember about Cecil Chapman?
Oh, he was a jocular fellow. He was wonderful. He was gruff and sweet. He was all those things, I don't know, all those things you would want to see in your grandfather. By the time I met him, I adored him. I thought he was wonderful. I mean, he was very, very gruff, and yet at the same time he was a cream puff. It was just great. I was able to convince him that he needed to join the board at the Nature Center, which he did, and went face to face with his arch enemy, whose name, whose name would make his ears turn red. Just thinking about her. But they got along after it was over with.
Really?
One of the board members down at the Nature Center, Alma Walker, who was literally the person responsible for the Nature Center being there.
Uh-huh.
She was the one who took all those professors by the scruff of the neck and dragged them into saving the swamp down here. And SCS wanted to channelize Sandy Creek at the time, you see.
Huh.
They wanted to straighten it
that's
up.
right. That's right. I heard about that.
And Alma went ballistic and got all these other people, Al Ike, Walt Cook, Don Scott, all these university professors together, and Eugene Odom, whose
Really?
textbook trains every environmentalist in the world.
Yeah.
And he was right here in Athens.
Yeah.
And these people got together under her under her fist, literally, and she said, "You will not allow them to do this," and they did. They pressured Chapman to such an extent that he stopped it from happening. And then that property down there was purchased from a bunch of landowners in the area who jumped on the wagon. The Farmer family.
Okay. Yeah.
Robert is a cousin in that family, and they owned a lot of land down there. And who was Freeman? Oh, there were several. Homer Fleming was one who they donated the land.
Okay.
And some of it was purchased with a grant, and I don't know exactly how much. I can't
And that
pull
was,
that off the top of my head.
That was
but
the land for the Nature Center.
for the land for the Nature Center, yeah.
Okay.
But it was all affecting, all of this was affecting that, you see, because the SCS had plans for all that drainage area, and the Nature Center was right in the middle of it, and it was the reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the thing that everybody pointed their fingers to and said, we've got to save this habitat. And of course you pull in all the endangered species list at the time. You pull in the fact that the Louisiana water thrush nests down there. That there's a fern that doesn't grow anywhere else in the state of Georgia except right down there. The marginal wood fern was used to convince the federal government not to channelize Sandy Creek because it would be destroying valuable habitat. Even though, mankind's quest for development and his rabid timbering of this state destroyed all that and put the silt in the rivers to begin with that caused the swampy areas. Even so, that ended up being a good thing for the natural environment for certain species. So there was the argument, and SCS, of course, caved into that. And created a spillway here on this dam. The design of this dam on this lake and the design of the spillway is unique in all the world. There is not another dam or spillway constructed like this one is. And it's because of Alma Walker that it was designed and constructed the way it is, because she just would not let go.
Interesting. And when you say the spillway, is that the part?
And we called it affectionately, we never said so in public really, but we always called it then when Alma died, she died of Lou Gehrig's disease. And from then on, we affectionately call that spillway the Alma Walker Memorial Spillway. Because she, in fact, was the impetus behind the redesign of it, so that the creek wouldn't have to be channelized, to promote the flow of the water through there.
Yeah.
So their standard dam design was not applicable in this case. They had to modify it.
Huh. Okay. That's interesting. And that was all that while it was the Soil Conservation Service that was doing all the work, and then they jumped on board with the park. Now, how did that happen?
Jumped on what?
Well, when they got involved in the actual creation of the park, I guess what I'm trying to get at.
It was all part of the same grant application, I think, from SES, because
I see.
the watershed area, this was Site 10, of course, the watershed area went way up there, way into Jackson County and up the river. And it included 10 sites, and this one was to be the last one in a watershed management area. They were going to build 10 dams. And this happened in the early 70s. I think the first application was sent to the federal government for this whole process for agriculture, to promote agriculture, irrigation, and flood control. Those were the three things.
Yeah.
And then the fourth was Site 10, was recreation. So there were 4 reasons why the SCS wanted to do this: flood control and management, agriculture, to promote agriculture, and to allow for effective irrigation of agricultural products and livestock, and then recreation.
Okay, so now I heard that a little differently, so I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, basically that was the grant application, and it was submitted and accepted in phased development.
Yeah.
Over a period of years, starting with the building of the dam, which commenced in, I think, 1968, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
And the federal government paid 100% the cost of the building of the dam, which was an impressive figure at the time. I want to say $3 million.
Okay, that sounds right. I know.
And it's somewhere in that neighborhood, $3 million. Of course, it got held up in the Nixon administration, but in the meantime, you see, all these people and organizations and everything were determined it was going to happen anyway, even though there was a political delay at the federal level. The White House was holding up all these things. But then, of course, it got relieved, and maybe Watergate saved the park. I don't know. But anyway, it was it recommenced. But in the meantime, the impetus was, it gave a lot of people a lot of time to say, yes, we're going to have this.
Yeah.
So the pressure was on, and of course the project began. There's 2 others above this one, so there were a total of 3 at it. They originally planned 10. There's one up here on, Seagraves Mill.
Okay.
There's one there. There's one above that, and I have no idea where that is. And then this one.
Okay. And this one you said was the last one.
This one is the last of the 3, incorporating the 4th principle of recreation, public recreation, in addition to the other 3.
Yeah.
So, of course, the swamp was destroyed in the middle of it, but there weren't a lot of federal regulations that the federal government had to comply with at the time. There was an archaeological study done, and it was determined there was in fact, a Cherokee Ore Creek village where the current camping area is now.
Oh, really?
We were still finding pottery washing up.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you can go up there any day of the week and find pottery shards. Yeah, and arrowheads. As they were excavating the trail that goes up the other side of the lake, there were just arrowheads galore unearthed. Just beautiful things. Yeah, quartz and flint.
Wow. Do you know how old? I mean, you said there's Cherokee and Creek.
No, I don't.
Don't worry about
The
it.
university did the study, and I never did see the study, actually.
Huh. That's interesting. I hadn't heard about that. I might track that down. how was the land acquired? You said that some of it was condemned.
Some was condemned. Well, you know, that's a horrible word, but it's an official word.
Yeah,
that's used.
yeah.
Like, most of the condemnation was by mutual consent.
Okay. Yeah.
And the landowners were paid fair market value or more for their properties. And most everybody was in favor of it. There were a few folks that balked, but you know, you're going to have that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But mostly there were benefits for the landowners that they could see. And I don't know from a personal perspective about the specifics of that
Okay.
procedure, but I know it took 5 years.
Okay.
And it went from 1968, I think, to 1972 or 1973.
Okay.
73, I think, the last parcel was brought in to the fold. And then in 70, I don't know when construction of the actual roads and buildings, I don't know when that started.
Okay. It looked
There's,
like 77 or 78 from what I kind of read.
yeah,
online.
probably
Does that
so.
sound right?
That sounds about right. Yeah, it's, phase 1 and 2 were already complete when I saw the park.
Yeah.
Phase 3 was in the process of being built.
Yeah. Okay.
And I can't even remember exactly what they were, but all the infrastructure was in place except the water lines to the buildings, you know, that was subsequently built in additional phases. But the roads were in place, the parking lots were in place.
And there was the swim beach already?
No, the swim beach was phase 5, I think. It came along in 80, somewhere in the early to mid 80s
Okay.
when it was constructed. And, I wasn't involved in the planning or design of any of the phases except 6 and 7. I had some influence over 6, and I had an influence over 7. This visitor center was phase 6. The barbecue building was phase 6.
Okay.
They didn't have a staff. There was nothing in the
Just
design.
wandering
Where does it
staff.
just wanders around? You know, they just shovel them all into the gatehouse, I guess, or something. Yeah, I don't, the continuity of phase 1 and 1 through 3, I just wasn't familiar with. George could fill you in on that.
Yeah. How big a staff did you have when it opened?
3.
Okay.
So it's a 634 acre park, right?
Yeah, yeah.
260 acres of it is lake. It's
Yeah.
brand new. There's a department director who also has to take care of the nature center and deal with the green line business, writing grants and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a gatekeeper
Mm-hmm.
who went to established operating hours, which
Yeah.
was every day of the week, 7 to 10.
Wow.
Except Wednesday. Wednesday was the only day we were closed. And that person maintained the gate for 40 hours a week, and then somebody else had to fill in, and it was usually me,
Yeah.
to do gatehouse work. And then there was one full-time maintenance person who was brought on board, but not until after, I mean, way after. I mowed grass for a year on a tractor. I learned how to operate a tractor, and I mowed grass. And then there was a recreation assistant who was hired, and he mowed grass. So there were no programs because everybody was maintaining the
Yeah.
grounds and dealing with the problems of a new park.
Yeah. And what kind of maintenance was there other than mowing grass?
Other than mowing grass, there was cleaning out all the restrooms and all the buildings and the floors, maintaining all these buildings,
Yeah.
mowing, vacuuming the carpets,
Yeah.
washing the windows, doing everything that you have to do,
Yeah.
emptying trash 3 and 4 times a day in 6 or 7 areas.
Yeah, that's-
And
Huh.
one weekend, we would completely fill a dumpster
wow.
when we first opened. So all of us had to do all of the work, and there were 4 of us.
Was
And
there,
one of them was stuck in that building right there,
Yeah.
and then the other 3 of us had to run the park.
Yeah. Was there any kind of work done in sort of the more natural areas, plantings, or any kind of?
Not for a while, no. See, the park was still under construction,
Mm-hmm.
so the refurbishing of the landscape and the building up of turf on hard pan
Mm-hmm.
was one of our first priorities. You see, we had no topsoil to grow any grass in,
Mm-hmm.
so that was a constant struggle to get
Yeah.
something growing out there.
And what did happen to the topsoil?
Oh, do I have to talk about that?
well, you
I don't
gotta be
know
really curious
personally.
now.
Okay, it happened before I got here, but it was one of my first questions when
Uh-huh.
I had to deal with trying to grow something on this. It was just a hard pan. I mean, you could have made pottery out of it. It was
Yeah.
horrible. And I said, what happened to all the, this area was a farm. There's 2 feet of topsoil down here on the other side.
Mhm.
2 feet of it.
Mhm.
What happened to the topsoil? Well, the story that I heard, and I don't know this from personal experience, you understand,
Okay.
but what I heard was that it was bulldozed up. Some of it was used to build the dam,
Mm-hmm.
and some of it was taken to the landfill.
Hmm.
But it was not put back on top for the purpose of growing any grass on here.
Yeah.
It was used for other purposes.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine that would make it kind of difficult to make this into sort of a resource area, as it was theoretically
Well,
at first.
the design itself, this area, the area that we had the most trouble with, that was excavated, began level off for ball fields
Mm-hmm.
with backstops and fences and everything.
Mhm.
So they designed this whole area right here. The first thing you see when you enter this natural resource park is a ball field complex.
Yeah.
So that was a design problem that was inconsistent with standards all over the country,
Huh.
or all over the world, shall I say, with a resource park.
Yeah.
It bastardized the concept of a resource park.
Yeah.
And the topsoil was scraped off of that so badly because it had to be leveled with proper drainage for a ball field. You can't have puddles on a ball field. So, anyway, that happened. And it was just very, very difficult to get anything going up there because there wasn't anything to grow anything in.
Yeah. I can
So
imagine.
we poured thousands of dollars a year in fertilizer
Oh my.
on this place. I mean, just wasted all kinds of money trying to get grass growing in soil that was not suitable to grow anything.
And what finally happened? I mean, there seems to be grass now. So.
Well, you keep trying and you build up a level of topsoil every year. And
Yeah.
you put a 1/4 inch here of,
Yeah.
even if it's your dead grass seed from the season before, you've got something down there upon which something can grow. So it just takes time.
Yeah. So over time it did.
So over time, it developed its own layer of topsoil. But it was a struggle when it first started.
Yeah. It
And
sounds like
you
it.
have to experiment with different types of grasses and Bermudas that will tolerate that kind of, that will, the type of grass that grows in concrete.
Uh-huh.
That's what we had to put out there.
Crabgrass from the
And
south.
George wisely overseeded with a combination of things that the federal government used to stabilize soils. When they went through and taught farmers how to irrigate so that all their topsoil doesn't wash away, and that was the mixture that they used. It was a pasture mix.
Hmm.
So we had to develop a pasture mix first that included Cereus lespedeza that grows this high. You don't have that on a ball field either. So that created another problem for a ball field, but yet it stabilized the soil fairly quickly.
I see. Okay.
So that at least some things would
Yeah.
grow in there, even if it only made it conducive for weeds to grow in there.
Yeah.
And we had to deal with that for about 5 or 6 years before we could get a good stand of fescue going out
Uh-huh.
there.
Huh.
Or Bermuda, the fescue-Bermuda combination.
Huh.
But anyway, those ball fields were designed out there so that the Saturday and Sunday picnic groups, family reunions, that sort of thing, can enjoy a good pickup game of softball.
Mm-hmm.
Except there was one that was Little League regulation size
Mm-hmm.
that was snuck in there. But anyway, that's what happened there.
Well, it seems like there's sort of a lot of push-pull between the recreation folks and the the resources folks. Maybe you could kind of describe who was kind of on what side and what that was like dealing with trying to make everyone happy, I suppose, or at least everyone kind of relax.
Well, the only thing that anyone can do who's a professional in that area, in any area, is understand the difference. Understand that natural resource parks are natural resource parks. Frederick Law Olmsted built Central Park in New York. It's a resource park. Mm-hmm. It's designed to serve a purpose that is different from your average athletic complex. One is for one purpose and another is for another purpose. One tends to be natural resource related and dependent. The other is not. You're not dependent upon a natural resource environment in order to play basketball or tennis or baseball or football. You are dependent upon the natural resource if you go hiking. Mm-hmm. Nobody hikes up an interstate highway because it's not pleasant. Nobody wants to go hiking in a stadium because it's not what they want to do. It's mm-hmm. not what they're there for. They're there to enjoy the natural resources. They're there for sometimes quiet, peaceful connection with the environment. As spiritual connection. And that cannot be achieved in the accompaniment of a Little League ball game with all the noise and the loudspeakers and the lights. You can't achieve that kind of experience in that kind of environment. When you start compromising environments mm-hmm. that are designed to support recreational activities that include hiking and camping and fishing and boating and picnicking, and you combine those with loud recreational activities, with lots of man-made contraptions that go along with it, it detracts from the natural resource experience. The problem there is that everybody likes the peace and quiet and environment of a resource park. Mm-hmm. Everyone seems to be drawn to that, mm-hmm. including people who like to play ball. They want their sports complexes built in that type of environment, huh. so that they can enjoy that scenery, that setting, and still play ball. Hmm. And that's perfectly natural and normal. But it does become a problem when you compromise a natural resource-based area with loud and unusual activities.
Yeah.
Because it limits what that area can do for the people who are drawn to that area for other reasons other than to play ball. Mm-hmm. And it was difficult to get that concept across, and it's probably still difficult to get it across in Athens, Georgia, because Athens, Georgia is a sports-related town. Mm-hmm. And if you try to separate an area from that, you become an anti-sports person. Instantly.
Yeah.
Instantly, you become anti-sports.
Huh.
And you dance through the tulips, and you tree hug, and you don't appreciate anything else. Uh-huh. So you become an antagonist, because in Athens, Georgia, sports is everything. Yeah. To some people. And that's fine, except that there are other things to do for other people who don't like to do that all the time. There are people who enjoy peace and quiet. They need a place to go where they can enjoy peace and quiet in this very, very noisy world we live in. And I fought to keep this place that way. Yeah. And it was a constant struggle. Yeah. Because everybody loved it. Everybody thought it was beautiful, and everybody wanted to do their own thing in this place, whether it was compatible or not. So, that's pretty much the principle of resource parks, is that the activities in a resource park, which are recreational in nature, depend entirely and completely upon the natural environment to achieve the objectives of the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bottom line. And that's recognized worldwide.
Mm-hmm. How was it originally decided to make this, or was it even officially decided to make this a resource park as opposed to a recreation park?
National principles, for many, many reasons, which you can talk for hours about,
Okay.
so I won't get into,
Okay.
which I've already gotten into. There are principles in design of community parks that include a certain percentage of a community's area based upon its population density, that give a percentage generally of how much area needs to be set aside for the purpose of establishing and maintaining resource parks that are designed to allow people access to enjoy natural environments and yet protect the integrity of the environment at the same time, and the resources for that community, the water resources, the soil resources, the air quality. And it's determined by people who know what's needed. They know that trees produce oxygen for people to breathe, and in a community that's well planned, that's just one example of many, many. We are dependent upon the natural environment for our very existence, and there are very wise people in this world who know that, who establish standards for design in communities. Now, communities can either accept those standards, or they can say, we don't want that kind of quality because we'd rather make a lot of money. Yeah. We'd rather have builders build and build and build and build and build and cut down all the trees and pollute the rivers and not establish barriers for the protection of our environment so that we can foul it if we want to. And we can make lots and lots of money. And we can do that. Yeah, we can, certainly. And to a certain extent, the master plan for leisure services that was developed in this county corrupts those standards by reducing the area of standardized for this community, reducing that by 1/2. And they'll say differently, but the southeastern complex down there is a sports with hiking trails associated with it. It's not a resource park. The resource park that was put in there by the design firm that designed the master plan that the county operates on for recreation or leisure services includes half the space for resource parks that principles and standards allow or recommend. 1/2. So Athens, Georgia has compromised itself as far as its natural resources are concerned in the public sector by 1/2. Because there is no resource park on the south end as planned, the size of this one here. So, that was a political decision. And, Athens has sold out on the environment that way.
But this park itself was always meant to be a resource park and has sort of.
I don't know what the government's plans are for this park now. I know that the staff resources for this park and the operating resources for this park are about 1/2 of what they were 15 years ago. So that gives me an idea of how much they care about resource-related recreation activities and where the emphasis is and where it isn't. So Athens is into, as far as I'm concerned, as far as what I can see, and the support for these types of places is into money, is into a few people making a lot of money. So that's what you see here. You can see it in the deterioration of the place.
When you talk about resources, I mean, part of that seems to be, recreation, hiking within the resources. I'm wondering if part of that was also protecting any specific wildlife. in the area and providing habitat. Was that something that originally, when this park opened, was a goal?
Yes, and the county supported it 100%.
Okay.
It's a wildlife sanctuary. The
Okay.
county designated the area as a sanctuary under the auspices of the Nature Center Board. As a part of this complex, the Sandy Creek Park Nature Center and Cook's Trail in between, it's all a wildlife resource
Mm-hmm.
protection area, a sanctuary.
And has it been successful as a sanctuary?
Any areas, regulations, any areas, policies under the public sector's graces are as effective in their missions as law enforcement is effective in that public jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
Where you have laws, you must have enforcement of those laws, or you can throw those laws out the window
Mm-hmm.
because they don't exist without accompanying enforcement. This area, the recreation areas, have very little in statutory enforcement of their policies and regulations. That's not always been the case, but it is now.
Okay.
So if somebody wanted to, for example, enter this park at night and hunt with a light,
Mm-hmm.
they could do so and get
Mhm.
away with it.
Yeah.
If they wanted to camp here overnight illegally,
Mm-hmm.
they could get away with it
Mm.
because there aren't any enforcement resources.
Has
Yeah.
that always been true?
No. Mm-mm.
When was sort of the height of that not being true? I suppose. I mean, when was it?
Clarke
were
County
those
had a
lots of-
mounted police program through the sheriff's office,
Okay.
a park police program. It was very effective.
In the 80s?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Late 80s, early 90s,
Okay.
till 1991, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Okay. I guess the other sort of thing I was getting at when I asked if that was successful is, have you seen a lot of different kinds of species here? Is it sort of biologically is a good habitat? Is it not just an area where things aren't going to be hunted, but is it an area where, creatures seem to like it? I guess is a simple way of putting it.
Life operates in cycles. All life operates in cycles. Cycles of enzymes, cycles of hormones, cycles of life, cycles of dependency, all biological cycles. Where you allow those cycles to operate unimpeded, you have success of a species. Greenways, for example, are critical areas for the migration of gene pools in natural environments, for animals or insects even, for all forms of life. Without a flexible gene pool in a species will not survive.
Mhm.
And that's the simple black and white of that issue. Where you allow movement
Mhm.
of species, then that species will genetically survive,
Mhm.
unless there are other factors, of course, that interfere with that. But that's fundamental to the success of species, is their ability to move freely within the environment.
Mhm. So would you then say that the greenway, I guess, is the key as far as
The
that?
greenway allows that movement
Yeah.
from one habitat to another,
Mhm.
so that the species don't get encapsulated and inbreed
Yeah.
and then genetically fail. And you can see that in human populations that are isolated too. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a known thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so the greenways are critical areas
Mhm.
for the survival of species.
Mhm.
And they also act as filters and sponges and
cleansing agents for what man produces to foul the environment. Nature can correct just about anything we can come up with, provided she has the resources to do it. If we allow that movement within the natural environment to take care of itself, it will take care of itself. Again, you isolate it, you don't give it enough room, it won't do it.
Do you think that here in this park, and I suppose with the Greenway and the Nature Center, that's happening? Or is it too early to say?
To whatever extent it can happen, however, there have been no attempts on behalf of the government to actually study changes environmentally in the area. Not that I know of. Now, there may have been attempts for the staff to convince the government that this needs to take place, that the environment needs to be studied for deleterious effects or good effects. Whatever effects, whatever changes take place need to be monitored for you to know what's happening.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't, you turn your back on it, nobody's ever going to know.
Yeah.
But as far as I know, I haven't heard, because I haven't asked.
Yeah.
That may be taking place and it may not.
Yeah.
The only time that we were ever able to do anything about that or to, I don't know, you put out fires when you have areas that are used heavily. And one of the things that in a man-made lake that you have to deal with is all the things that happen as a result of the development of an ecosystem. When the ecosystem is not fully developed, you have algae blooms and things, fish kills and things like that, and people go, ah! So you have to do something about it. So you're constantly having to put out this fire and put out that fire and have sterile grass carp launched into there to take care of the milfoil problem that you have, so that you can take care of this other problem that you have, because people have to use this area and you don't want all the fish to die because you've invested this amount. And you see, you're having to constantly manipulate this brand new environment so that it can be compatible to itself and to the public that's using it.
Yeah.
So as far as maturity of the area goes, I would expect it's mature. The lake turns over twice a year. It's doing its thing. It's a limnotic wonder out there now, but it still needs to be monitored. And I don't think it is.
Well, it sounds like, did you find yourself using your biology degree quite a bit?
Considerably, yeah. When we had a fish kill, because I'm not an ichthyologist,
Yeah.
I knew that we had to contact one to get out there to find out what the problem is, so that we could correct it.
That's a good start.
Like, so we knew the fish had a fungus and it was killing them. It was in their gills, killing them, and they were coming right up to the surface. Well, what is it? It's an algae bloom. It's a new lake.
Yeah.
The E. coli levels from upstream are encouraging this bloom that's killing the fish. Well, there you go. And it'll take care of itself, thank you very much.
Yeah.
In the meantime, you've got this cleanup problem,
Yeah.
because people don't come to a lake that smells like dead fish.
Yeah. Huh.
So you have to do those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Probably would have been better left.
Huh.
But you can't do that because you have a public you have to serve. And you have to make them comfortable to whatever extent you can. You can't have a hornet's nest poised over a door to a restroom. You have to do something about that. You can't, there's a compromise in any public area that's partially developed that you have to maintain.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult thing to maintain because you're compromising both. You're compromising human civilization and you're compromising the environment.
Yeah.
But there are certain things that you must do in order to encourage people to enjoy their experience. If you've got wooden picnic tables, you've got to spray them down or they're going to sit there and they're going to develop chiggers. So that when people sit down on the picnic table and they get up and the next morning they've got 35 chigger bites on their fannies, well, they're not going to come back to your park and picnic under those circumstances. So you have to use pesticides and you have to take measures to bring the two environments together to whatever extent you can within a reasonable limitations. So that's what you do.
Yeah.
And you spend all your life doing that.
Yeah.
And you don't have time or monetary resources to conduct studies on the effects of the environment,
Yeah.
because you're too busy spending your money attracting people to your park.
Yeah.
And you have to attract people to your park because what governments like to hear are statistics.
Mhm.
And if you want more money, you have to show statistically that you deserve it. That this park deserves more input and more support because the public obviously wants to use it.
Mhm. Yeah.
So there you go. You're off on the statistic chasing track.
Yeah. Well, let's speaking of statistics, what sort of users were originally sort of envisioned for the park? Who was expected to use the park?
Oh, well, fishermen,
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, the federal government envisioned resource recreation functions.
Mhm.
They envisioned boating and fishing and picnicking and general enjoyment, hiking trails. They
Mhm.
paid for those things. Camping.
Mhm.
There's a family camping area up there that was part of the original plan. I guess it was phase 4 or 5, I think. Phase 7 included the RV campground, but that was a SPLOST request, and it was, for some reason, rejected as part of the SPLOST plan because it made money for the park system.
Mhm.
It's another thing, a government has to understand that in order for park systems to justify themselves nationwide, they have to earn their keep.
Yeah.
And they earn their keep through reasonable users' fees.
Yeah.
And that's the principle of if you use it, you pay for it.
Yeah.
So that people who don't use it don't have to pay for it.
Mhm.
Duh. But I don't know why governments don't get into that principle. There's a lot that I don't understand about politicians and politics. It just don't make any sense as far as services, government services go.
Yeah.
But the fact is, it was wanted, it was needed, it was desired, it was requested by people who have RVs, by the club that's in Athens.
Mhm.
There's a he was Sam's Club, the guy that walked in here, he was
Yeah.
Sam's Club. Wanting RVs. Yeah. Let's have an RV park here, and it'll bring in all the money it takes to probably operate the whole park.
Yeah. Really. And you said that plans.
And they
were
said, no,
designed-
we can't put that on SPLOST project, it makes money. That belongs in the private sector.
Yeah. You mentioned that plans were actually designed, or plans were created for that RV park, and there was an investment made into it.
$100,000 was invested in complete working drawings for a recreational vehicle campground here
Huh.
that the SPLOST committee threw out.
And that was the official word, was that it made money?
That's what I heard. Of course, no one would say so directly,
Okay.
and least of all to tell me. I got it from an inside source.
Yeah. Was there some sort of concern about the government competing with?
That's
private
possible.
interests, maybe? Yeah.
That there was pressure from the private sector to do that. Of course, it never happened.
Yeah.
You know, show me the recreational vehicle campground in Athens, Georgia. Today, there is none.
Yeah.
No, so the private sector has its own agenda, and it's not necessarily what the private sector wants to tell the government. But some investor's going to make money off of it sometime, maybe. But they want that option open to them, and the public be damned.
Yeah.
And the government listens to that.
Yeah. What about demographically? What kinds of users were expected? Or was that?
I don't think there were any expectations that were made. As far as audience went, the first year it vastly exceeded the federal government's expectations.
Mhm. Huh.
Vastly.
Huh.
In its first year of operation. Got a lot of press the first year,
Yeah.
and that helped an awful lot. The local newspaper was behind it 100%.
Mm-hmm.
They thought it was wonderful, and there wasn't enough they could do to expose this park to the public. Every week there was something big in the paper about Sandy Creek Park. Yeah,
That's
the newspaper was very supportive.
Yeah.
But it takes time for people to get. Oh, there's so much going on in Athens. Athens is a busy place. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very diverse area. There's people of all kinds of backgrounds and interests, and it's just a very dynamic community.
Yeah.
It's like none other, really.
Yeah.
And you hear that from architects and engineering firms that come in from out of town, from other states, and they constantly say this area is like a beehive. It's like going in every direction at once, and that's wonderful. It's a great place to live that way. But it's very difficult to get people's attention in a community like this because there is so much busyness and so much diversity in things for people to do. And the university, of course, makes that happen an awful lot. But Athens is a very busy place. If you're bored in Athens, it's your own fault. and it's just very, very hard to get people's attention about what's available in Athens. Because of that, it just takes years for something to get established as somewhere to go and someplace to do something,
Yeah.
something new. And so we tried, but the attendance was good. But everyone that would come in the park would say, I didn't know this place was out here. And we finally got highway signs, and that helped. But it was years before we got that. It was a long time before the transportation department recognized the need for directional signage to the park. When we put up a sign to the park, we're going to have to put up a sign to everything. That was the response I got for a request to put up signage for the park. But several years later, after the park opened, we finally did get some signage. And that helped, because people would see the sign, they'd pull up and say, what's this? And that was our biggest exposure.
Yeah.
It was highway signs on 441 North. It was as simple as that.
Interesting.
Yeah, people are busy around
Yeah.
here.
How did you advertise before that?
Newspapers primarily. We had flyers. We had a mailing list. Of course, we had an annual permit program right off the bat to encourage people to. It's ownership in the park.
Yeah.
So the annual permit was a first year kind of thing, and word kind of spread from that. We had a core group, I guess, of several hundred people who had family annual permits. And we would send flyers to all of them. We kept a mailing list of that, and we would send flyers out to them. We tried to do workshops with a limited staff. We would try to do that to attract people out to the park, and family orientation kind of thing. And then the beach came along after the beach attracted an awful lot of people into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Water just attracts people from everywhere.
Was that kind of a different audience?
No, not really. Not at first. It is now.
Okay.
I don't know, it wasn't at first, because we had so many groups coming out here that we had businesses that would have their employee picnics out here, and so you had a wide variety of different kinds of people coming out here.
Yeah.
But a lot of it was business, family reunions, sororities, fraternities, just a lot of different kinds of folks. The county used it a lot. The government used it a great deal.
Okay.
Meetings.
Okay. Yeah. They knew it was there.
Yeah, they would have a department party. They would come out here and rent a picnic shelter and have their Christmas party and their birthday parties for whoever.
Yeah.
Retirement parties and things like that.
Yeah.
But the beach drew in an awful lot of people and brought an awful lot of new audience into the park that wasn't there before. It's a snowballing effect. The more people you have, the more the word spreads. And, every year the attendance increased by volumes by 15 by 20% per year.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. And then we had a powwow that brought in 8,000 people from all over the southeastern United States, which helped. And that went on for a weekend, and then we did the same thing the next year, and it brought in, despite the rain, it brought in thousands and thousands of people again.
Yeah.
And that increased our exposure.
And about when was that?
And then there was the Boy Scout Jamboree, Southeastern Jamboree. The kids came from all over the southeastern U.S.
About
So-
what time was that?
Oh gosh, I can't remember when the
Just
first
a vague-
jamboree was. 80s. All this happened in the
Okay,
80s,
okay.
mid to late 80s.
Okay,
First couple of years were tough because we didn't have the staff and we didn't have the wherewithal financially to do much of anything.
yeah.
In fact, the first powwow was co-sponsored by with the state.
Huh.
So,
Oh, okay. So did the state contribute staff to that? Or?
well, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so without it, of course, we knew enough about it and knew how to do it the second year. And the county did it on, well, Coca-Cola co-sponsored it the second year.
Okay. How was it decided? You mentioned the permits. How was it decided to charge fees?
I looked at what fees were being charged in similar institutions. Easy.
Okay. And what would be a similar institution? Like what would you consider sort of a...
State parks.
Okay.
Stone Mountain Park.
Yeah.
Tobesofsky State Park. Parks with a similar audience, with a similar structure.
Okay.
I just looked at those and got on the phone.
Yeah.
What are you charging and what are you charging it for? You know, what are people willing to pay?
Mm-hmm.
What services do you provide for that fee? That type of thing. A lot of them, we didn't start off with a boat ramp fee. We put that in later on, but most parks at the time did charge a boat ramp fee to launch a boat. Because a lake and a boat ramp and a pier and all that stuff is expensive to maintain.
Yeah.
Everybody wants something for nothing, so it's a hard sell with fishermen, and fishermen are a very, very vocal audience. And they didn't want to pay it. But eventually they did. They had to.
Yeah.
And as governments changed, fishing fees and boat ramp fees, unless you've got a state, a large governmental body over the jurisdiction, it's a very hard sell because you've got the good old boyism comes in with, you're going to do away with this ZEB, you just can't do that to us. We don't want to have to pay this ZEB now. In your position in the commission chair, you've got considerable power to keep us from having to pay this. That type of thing goes on a lot. And I think it went on a good bit here, but that goes on everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just one of those audiences that has a lot of power. Hunters and fishermen have a lot of power. I don't know much anymore, but it used to be Ducks Unlimited would stand behind the hunters, and they were a powerful organization.
Oh, yeah.
And they were very powerful in North Carolina, too. I think less powerful here than they were in North Carolina. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, why don't we take a little break? 'Cause I'm tired.
I'm tired, too.
All right. One thing I'm kind of wondering about, it seems like this is almost I don't know if it's a unique situation, but a rare situation where you had the county government and the federal government working together. What was that like, working with two governments?
Oh, it was great.
Really?
I enjoyed it. It's not unusual, by the way.
Okay.
And a number of grants were awarded to a lot of different communities by the Federal Soil Conservation Service for just that purpose. It wasn't just the state of Georgia.
Okay. Huh. I didn't know that.
Athens was lucky because there was a federal area one that the office, the regional office was in Athens, Georgia, for the Soil Conservation Service.
Oh, okay.
So you had the head conservationist right here in Athens for the whole service. Yeah.
And there was the state conservationist or the...
No, this is federal. This
Oh,
is
okay.
United States.
Oh, I see.
Department of Agriculture, Soil Conservation Service, and the conservationist was right here in Athens.
Huh. And who was that?
Cecil Chapman.
Oh, that was Cecil Chapman. Oh, okay. I see.
But it was wonderful working with the federal government engineers because they had so much knowledge of what they were doing, and they never let go of the principles upon which they were designing and engineering. The principles came first, and then everything else followed along in accordance with the principles. So it was great to work with them because they understood that.
Yeah.
And they abided by that. And they objected to a lot of things that some people wanted in this park. They were pretty insistent upon selecting an architectural engineering firm for the master plan for this park, for the design of the park, for the working drawings. Somebody who understood the design of resource parks. Now, they were going to pay 50% of the design services, and the county was going to pay 50% of the design services. What happened was that an architect here who was in cahoots with the commissioners bid on this project, and his bid price was less than 50% of the total project estimated cost.
I see.
And he put in that bid in order to be awarded the work, and the county gave the contract to that architect with the Soil Conservation Service loud objections. The county did it anyway and financed 100% of the design services, controlled the design services, and saved money doing it by selecting this guy. The politics of that, I don't know. But the park had design flaws in it that the Soil Conservation Service understood. They went ahead and continued their agreement with Clarke County. But Clarke County made a serious mistake starting off that way. Because there was such an impetus for the park to be built, the Soil Conservation Service continued their relationship with the county. But it was not an altogether pleasant relationship in some regards. And I didn't, the first two phases I had no involvement at all.
Yeah.
They had pretty much ironed out their differences by the time I came along.
Okay.
So I don't know how rough that might have been. I understood it was pretty rough. And there was very little agreement on anything. But the county started off on the wrong foot with the feds on that. And the design was compromised because of it. And the University of Georgia School of Forest Resources, and the University of Georgia School of Environmental Design brought their classes out here constantly to show them how not to design a resource park.
Really?
Here's how you don't do it, and here are all the reasons why. And I was constantly asked to talk to these groups of kids who were learning about these things, about the problems that we had
And what were
in
some
this
of those?
park. Well, you've got a compromised design because you've got your primary emphasis when you first drive in this park is on athletics. That's one. The design of the community building was amazing. It was a wind tunnel. It was at the time it was $110,000 to build. There's a stone fireplace in that building, second to none. It is incredible. And the first thing they did when they put the roof on the thing, the roof shifted over 16 feet or something like that. It was ridiculous. And they had to tear it down and start over again. But it's, even as they built it, it's a wind tunnel. The wind comes in off the lake, it comes around, it blows all the coals out of the fireplace and up against the wooden walls on the opposite side.
Wow.
You can't use the fireplace in that building. It was never designed to be enclosed, if you wanted to enclose it. You can't enclose the thing. It wasn't designed to be flexible that way. So there it is. It's a huge $110,000. And here, these are the chief engineer's words, quote, "It's an architect's monument to himself," unquote. And indeed, it's quite an obelisk
Huh.
with wood supports around it and a couple of restrooms. And it's about 100-yard walk uphill from the beach area to the restrooms. It's a very difficult march up the woods to the restrooms from the beach. Of course, they've taken care of that problem now.
Yeah, I know.
But for years, it was a huge problem.
Well, you mentioned the wind coming and blowing the embers from the fire into the wooden wall, and that made me want to ask, have you ever had any fires here? Or did you?
No, actually, we were lucky that way through a lot of droughts. There was one fire that occurred out here, and we called the fire department. And by the time the fire department came out here, the mounted patrolman and the maintenance officer and Rick Kelly had put it out with their bare hands. They went roaring out there on little ATVs and on horseback and put that fire out barehanded. And it was an area about the size of this room right here.
Yeah, so about, 10 feet by 10 feet? Or
But it was
15, something like that.
Yeah, it's about 20 by 30, I think,
Okay,
something like
so
that. But anyway,
yeah, well,
they put it out with
yeah,
their
you're
bare
right,
hands.
they
They were all burned.
Yeah, I bet.
But they got a hero's welcome.
Well,
and
yeah, it's good to have some people like that on your staff, especially if you got a staff of 3, I guess.
it was an extraordinary
Huh.
leap of loyalty to the park
Yeah.
for them to do that. I mean, then they did it instinctively. It was dry, it was windy, and there was an inmate labor crew up there in the woods, and they were smoking and just flicking their cigarette butts out in the woods, and that's what started it.
So where was it? What area of the park?
It was on the other side of the lake, above the
Oh, on
camping
the other
area.
side
It
of
was
the
up
lake,
on the
okay.
trail, yeah, above the
Okay.
camping area.
Yeah, so way out there.
But it was, and they were building trails up in there, and they had an inmate crew up there in the woods, cutting trees down. Oh, thunder!
Yeah.
But anyhow,
Huh. Interesting. Speaking of the other side of the lake, it looked to me from some maps and stuff, like some land was purchased over on that side. Is that right?
yeah, we purchased the Cook Estate, which was a house and a farmland. It was a beautiful piece of property, and it abutted right up to the park, and there was a little pond in there, and a freshwater pond and spring, and a really nice custom-built house back in the woods. And it was vacant. The Cooks had owned it, and Mrs. Cook had become too elderly to keep up the house, so she moved, and the county bought that farm.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason they bought it was to build a resident summer camp for kids,
Oh, okay.
where they would learn all about parks and have fun and horseback ride and
Yeah.
learn about police work. All of the staff would participate in it. The mounted police would have a particular interest in it. They were really looking forward to it. And never happened.
Huh.
But
But does the park still own that land?
Park still owns it. They're not doing anything with it. We had a staff member living in the house. And we let a staff member,
Huh.
not a maintenance fellow. He was a single young man.
Yeah.
And he lived there. And I arranged it. I had an interdepartmental thing, but I let him live there free. He didn't have to pay us anything, and he would take care of the place. If the
Okay.
roof needed replacing, he was responsible for doing it.
Yeah.
No, he kept the grounds up.
Yeah.
He kept the house up. A house that's not lived in deteriorates and
Oh, yeah.
very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what's happening to it right now. It's going to hell because nobody's taking care of it.
Hmm.
There's not a maintenance staff right now assigned to the park. They come
Yeah.
in from other areas and they
Yeah.
clean up a park that they don't know anything about or have any appreciation for, except that the guys who are actually doing it have had a history with this park and have used to work here full time, so at least there's not that problem.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, could be.
Anyway, that never happened. That camp never happened because the budget was, well, it was all thrown out because we consolidated the governments, and then that was the end of that.
Mhm.
That was the end of money coming into parks at that point in time. Might have been a real good thing for other things, but it was not a good thing for parks.
Okay. Well, that's actually the next thing I was going to ask you about. What that merger was like. You did mention that there was a day camp that came out of that.
Well, I came out of the crisis when the city was still the city and the county was still the county. That was developed
Okay.
during that time and was in place when unification took place.
Okay.
But that was one of the good things that came out of that argument that was all about unifying the governments. It was a political argument,
Mm-hmm.
and a good thing came out of it.
Mm-hmm. And that was the day camp, which now
And the day camp. Right.
turned out to be very.
Yeah. Well, that was a primary glowing example of that. There were a lot of good things that came out of it, but that was one of them.
Okay.
When the unification occurred, the departments were split. There were two departments, again. One was arts and environmental education,
Mm-hmm.
and the other was recreation. So there were two departments created out of that unity. And it almost immediately, the county administrator decided that it was time to hire a firm to do a master plan because he was determined himself to enfold all of it under one department, and a lot of politicians were. Basically, what it did was do what a lot of jurisdictions are doing, and I used, again, other jurisdictions in order to come up with a justification for separating resource parks and recreation parks. I mean, the active-passive thing again,
Yeah.
which they used in the master plan time and time again. Active recreation and passive recreation. Oh, God.
Or again, the active is
Oh,
soccer.
God, the ignorance
baseball.
was just rampant in that process.
Yeah.
The ignorance that came out of that master plan was enormous.
Huh.
Anyway, the master plan was developed, and of course, the committee that selected the architectural engineering firm, and some of the committee members even said out loud, I'm not going to decide on any of these architectural engineering firms if they don't agree up front. They're going to combine these two departments as part of the plan. And we need to decide that now and then select based upon their willingness to do that.
And
Well, that was turned down, but still that attitude was there. The committee members were carefully selected from people who believed that they needed to be merged into one big department, that it would be more effective that way.
and why was there so much support?
And of
for-
course, it happened that way.
Yeah.
There was much ado with the board of directors down here because resource parks were just left out in the cold. Left out in the cold. It's like, land, raw land, is something that you use. It's something that you develop. You do something with it. You don't just leave it there. You don't just not build something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's there for a purpose, and the purpose is for it to be cut down and something built on it so that people can do something. That was the attitude.
Hmm.
But it's probably time for me to not talk anymore about that subject because I'm very, very adamant about it, and it didn't turn out the way I felt professionally it should have. And of course, the presumption there was that resource recreation services would get dumped on, and as it turned out, it has been.
Hmm.
Because the park is right now in the same financial picture it was in 1981.
Yeah.
Which clearly shows the community's deflection of its resources into something else.
Hmm. I suppose at the height of the staff and of the kind of money that was being put into this park and everything, what was so successful? I mean, why was it at that time that it was working so much better?
At the time, at what time?
And I suppose it was, the late 80s when there was a mounted police force, when there were, 5 staff members, is that right? Or?
There was a government in place that supported it, that understood the need and the desire, that there were people who were sympathetic to it.
And why were they sympathetic to it? Did it take some effort on the part of people here, you and
I can't begin to touch why, what goes on in people's heads and why some people understand and appreciate some things and don't others.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to touch that. We had a government in place at the time that was supportive of the fact, it's not a notion, it's not a theory, it's a fact that people flood into natural resource areas all over the country to the point where national parks and state parks are so impacted that they have to control now the audience because there's so many of them flooding to these areas to do just what this park intended to do for its own community on a state and federal level, that they're destroying the areas. They're really severely, deleteriously affecting the resource. So they're having to put controls on how many people can use these areas at any given time. In the middle of winter, national parks are crowded. They're traffic jams in the middle of January in these resource parks, not to mention the balmier times of the year. And there are people in control who understand that, and there are people in control who don't understand that. The majority of the commissioners in place at the time understood that, that people want and need this type of park. And the big issue with most people nationwide, if you do any research, is security matters. If people feel safe, they will go to these places and they will picnic and they will camp and they will enjoy the outdoors. If they don't feel safe in them, they won't come. Period. Security was a big issue. We had a mounted patrol service. People came. If you don't have that, a certain element of people come who don't necessarily have your best interests in mind. And it may be the same numbers of people or close to it, but it's a different sort of person that comes to a park that doesn't have security in it. Secured resource parks are more successful and better supported and better kept.
Do you remember when it was exactly that the mounted patrol was here? I can look that up if you don't remember off the top of your
I
head.
can't give you dates,
Okay.
but it was a long time. It was until 91, and it was
Okay, so it's
probably,
not-
well, I can look it up. It's in here somewhere.
Okay, we'll look that up afterwards. I don't
Yeah,
want to make you
that'd be
go flipping through all that.
No, like I said, I can give you copies of that type of
Yeah, that'd be
information
great.
that you can attach to this.
Yeah, okay. When you said that it's a different kind of people that are, that will come to a park that's not secure.
Well, I don't, and that may be erroneous, not a different type
Okay.
of person, but a person who might take advantage of a good situation. That
Okay.
if someone
Yeah.
feel like locks on buildings are to keep well-intended people out.
Yeah.
They don't keep criminals out. But well-intended people can do things that they wouldn't do if there were a presence of enforcement in a park,
I see.
whether it's a staff member or whether it's a police officer. National Parks knows this. They have National Park Rangers. Those rangers are law enforcement officers. They're primarily public relations, but if they have to enforce, they can do it, and they're there. They're a constant presence. And the federal government knows that this is the way a successful park operates, that parks like that can constitute a clear and present danger to the public if they're not enforced, if there's not a law enforcement presence there. And it doesn't have to be in your face. just a presence, that it's there, that we mean business here. When we have regulations, we mean it. Douse your campfire. If you don't douse your campfire, we're going to give you a ticket. You know, that's the way it is. Be responsible, and we're going to see to it that you are responsible. If you're not, we're going to do something about it. Otherwise, you're very welcome to be here. You know, we'll help you out any way we can. And the thing with the mounted police was that it was a public relations tool that was second to none. People come out to parks to see just that, to pet the horses, and you know, it also gives police a good image too. So it helped the sheriff's office immensely. And then later the police office, the county police. But anyway, it was a good thing, and it kept people safer because people get out here and they'll start swimming across the lake just to see if they can do it. Well, the park's been lucky. For the last 10 years, the park has been lucky. And there have been staff members out here who might be 17 years old and getting paid $8 an hour to run a concession service. And when they see somebody in trouble, they run over there and they help them out and they keep them from drowning. So the park's been lucky. They're not lifeguards, they're not trained lifeguards, they're just there. And they see a problem and they prevent something from happening, but that's not always going to be the case. So, law enforcement, the park police did prevent problems from happening. They prevented fist fights on the beach. They prevented people from taking off all their clothes. They prevented people from getting drunk and being unruly and using loud and obscene language, so that mothers with small children would decide that they wouldn't bring their kids out here anymore because they didn't want them exposed to that kind of lewd and obscene behavior. With a law enforcement presence, that sort of thing just doesn't happen. And if it does, it's quickly dispatched and people can go on enjoying themselves. You don't have that out here now. Fortunately, you have a staff that's willing to dive in and mitigate, even though they're not trained in that area. And the government's liable if something happens to them when they intercede. It's a huge lawsuit waiting to happen. And a simple, you know, you can rock along for 8-10 years and think there's nothing wrong out there. Everything's fine. Look, now we had all the drownings when there was all this law enforcement in place. A equals B. 1 year, it's going to happen again, and it's going to cost them millions, just like that. Now that's a prediction that's based on past experience elsewhere from other folks who over the years have learned. And maybe it won't, and God help us, I hope it doesn't. And if it does, I think the first thing, well, I'll project that. I mean, we'll just do away with the park. No, what we can do is put houses along this lakeside over here and add a lot to our tax base, instead of having all these problems with this park. And that happens sometimes too. So, you know.
At the sort of height of the staffing here, how big a staff did you have, and what did they do?
There was always a recreation programmer, someone with recreation degree, who organized events and workshops and educational programs. There was a staff of, there was a maintenance superintendent and 3 to 4 maintenance assistants. In a park that draws $15,000 to $25,000 people a year and takes in a couple of $100,000 a year, you have trash cans at least 3 days out of the week that need to be emptied 4 times a day. So the correct proportion of staff to maintain this park the way it needs to be maintained is 4 to 5 that work this park alone and no place else, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. because you have overnight services here too, and you have holidays that you're open and nobody else is. Government tends to think too that, and it was a constant problem with this thing, it's the staffing of this place. It was like, these are the hours that we operate. Your offices operate from 8 to 5 days a week. This place doesn't stop, folks, even when people aren't here one day a week. That doesn't mean the staff's still out here having to mow grass and maintain and clean up and paint and repair roofs and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
The barbecue building by itself takes a half a day for 2 people to clean up.
Huh.
Once a group is finished with it, they totally trash these places and they have to be cleaned up. The decks have to be hosed down. The picnic tables have to be disinfected, and you have to get all the wasp nests down. And you have to empty the trash, and you have to clean out the pits and the grills, and then there's constant problems with water lines, and you have to inspect the whole park because litigation really leans into injuries in parks. So you have inspection forms, and you have to inspect every piece of equipment every single week.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes one staff person all day to do that once
Mm-hmm.
a week. And 60% of a total recreation budget in a park like this is maintenance,
Mm-hmm.
as a rule of thumb. If it's not 60%, you're not doing it. 60% of total budget. And that's everything. That's staff, that's supplies, materials, equipment. It's a huge expense.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that's ever been the case here.
Mhm.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Maintenance is not something that
Mm.
is recognized as important as much as new stuff. New stuff. Brand new. Not continual, brand new.
Hmm.
And it's the car salesman principle. It's the sell the bright, flashy car and then don't have a good service department for it. It's that same principle. I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but Lee Iacocca knew better. If you can't maintain something, then make it self-destruct in 3 to 5 years. You know, there's a good compromise. Lee Iacocca knew people. He knew that they had to have the flash and glitter and recognition of a brand new thing,
Uh-huh.
but he also knew that you had to maintain it to keep people happy, so design it to self-destruct in 5 years and then you don't have to maintain it.
Yeah.
Everybody's happy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's a problem here with the SPLOST project. You submitted a budget with SPLOST, the first SPLOST project, right? Went in, and there were recreation things with it. There were parks needs along with SPLOST. That picnic shelter over there is a SPLOST project.
Okay.
Okay, so there were, and the expansion of the nature center was a SPLOST project.
Yeah,
The
the
NSET
building.
NSET building was the first SPLOST thing. So you come in with a budget very carefully recognized from past experience and needs based upon your audience and your growing percentages per year, which you carefully calculate and articulate and to have no one read. Your budget for maintaining these new places per annum that you want the people to know before they vote on this, that it's going to cost them $180,000 a year to keep these new buildings going after they're built.
Yeah.
And you put this in your report and you submit it and you articulate it to the manager, and that's as far as it gets. From there, it goes up to a published document that's available for the public that has no mention whatsoever of maintenance costs for anything. Why? Because they want people to vote this stuff in. They don't want people to know how much it's going to cost after they build them. Because if they know that, then they're going to vote no.
Yeah.
Because people are A, stupid, and B, ignorant
Yeah.
of anything that goes on there that's needed.
Yeah.
So you have to shove these things down people's throats, but don't tell them anything about what it's going to cost once they vote it in.
Yeah.
So you build them, right? And they are there. What happens to your budget when these two new big places are in place? What happens to your budget the first year they're available to the public? What happens? Guess. What
There is
happens to
none.
your budget?
Disappears.
Your budget
there is
is
some.
reduced.
Yeah. Yeah.
With two new facilities, you have less money to maintain them. And that has been the history of parks in Athens-Clarke County. Every year there's more stuff and less money to maintain it with. Now, what's going to happen to that, I wonder? It doesn't take an Albert Einstein to figure where they're headed.
Yeah.
And if there's a plan to do away with them, then this would fit right into that plan, wouldn't it? A gradual reduction and deterioration to the point where it would become so expensive to bring it back up to standard that the logical and most inexpensive way to deal with it is to do away with it. So that could be, maybe what's going down, or could be simple negligence.
Yeah. Well, what did you find yourself up against? Maybe you could describe if there's some specific kind of incident that sticks in your mind while you were the director,
Incident?
as far as budget. You know, what you've been talking about just now. You know, what did you find yourself kind of up against?
Well, the most glaring incident was the SPLOST.
Mhm.
That's the most glaring example.
Are you talking about the RV campground or just a general?
Well, that was part of it. That was part of it. But altogether, you know, I used the example of INSAT and the picnic shelter because
Yeah.
they were both projects that came in the same year and the same time.
I see.
And there was no compensation for maintaining or even using those
Yeah.
buildings.
Okay, I see.
There was no additional funding presented in the annual budgets for the effective maintenance and upkeep of those structures, much less staffing for them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, forget that. Jeez.
Huh.
But that was an example
That was, yeah,
of
okay.
what everybody's up against. I was up against it, and whoever's in charge now is up against it. And it's typical throughout the United States. The important things are for people to get fed and sheltered. Feeding and sheltering people and making money. Those are three real important things. When you're faced with increased expenses, inflationary expenses, which we're always going to experience, increased costs for things, governments experience this too.
Mm-hmm.
The government does a good job of protecting itself internally from those things that are most importantly, that affect the most important issues for people.
Mm-hmm.
And what hurts in those bad times is the esoteric elements of public service, the arts and resource recreation.
Yeah.
Those esoteric elements go in governments that are hard pressed to deal with other issues, infrastructure, public transportation, highways, public safety. All those issues come first
Yeah.
to government. They don't see a holistic balance. They can't because they get too much pressure, and they don't have the time or the wherewithal to be able to deal with it in a holistic manner to the point where they can get reelected by trying to justify it. They may believe it personally, and some of them have the courage to fight for it, and those are the ones that don't get reelected. They serve one term and they make their impact and they go, and that's the history of that. But people stay misinformed because they don't really want to know. They just want things handled for them.
Yeah.
But you're not going to take away somebody's fire protection, and you're darn sure not going to take away their police protection.
Yeah.
So what goes? So it's not a matter of, evil people in charge. It's a matter of, 'cause I've never been there. I don't think I'd want to be there. I mean, people who go into office in this particular community have an enormous amount of courage because they're battered from all sides 24 hours a day. And so I don't mean to criticize the people in charge. It's just the dynamics of the situation. And it's sad, really.
Yeah.
So what you emphasize too, because you understand something about that, is you create every opportunity for people to participate and help what they believe in. So you create a volunteer program in all aspects of your operation, and you emphasize that. And when you can prove, and when your volunteers go to prove, but for the politicians, that volunteers have put in 350 hours of volunteer service to this department in this fiscal year, proves that people want this service. So you use that to justify increased operating expenses, and I did. The Nature Center had one of the finest volunteer programs anywhere that I have ever seen.
Yeah.
And there were good, talented people running it. And the county said, good job, we're going to give you a volunteer coordinator for your department. And they did. Bam. In place it was. Volunteer services doubled.
That's interesting.
They were broadened into the park. They were broadened into other areas. Some of them went out and did help the city get one started for their programs.
Yeah.
But the volunteer program proved beyond the shadow of a doubt to politicians and the community that people want this. They need it, they want it, and they will exercise, they will devote hours and hours of support to it. And here's the proof.
Yeah.
And they go, okay. And they give you what you need. And now, I don't know what's happened in this new government.
Yeah.
I know that the leadership in natural resources is very sensitive to volunteer service because he grew up under it. He's very good at it. But I don't know that they're paying any attention to it now. I don't know. Of course, now it's not important. They used to.
Yeah.
They used to
Yeah.
pay attention to it.
When you talked about, specific people in government having the courage to go out and really push something, who here really did that for this park?
People in office who had the courage to push it publicly. Jim Holland,
Yeah.
Jewel John.
Who was that?
She was a commissioner for years,
Okay.
county commissioner.
Okay.
The mayor of the city of Athens, Lauren Coa. I hate to start naming names because a
Okay.
lot of them did come
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
And a lot of them were in place doing things very quietly before I even came around. So I don't know. Hugh Logan's involvement, Jim Della Pereira's involvement, I don't know.
Yeah.
I wasn't involved at that point in time. But Hugh Logan at the time was a state representative and evidently contributed significantly to it.
Who did you really work with in government, or in elected government, I guess?
Who did I work with as far as politicians or as far as the system itself was concerned?
Well, how about both? First politicians and then.
Well, the structure in the county was that requests came through, there wasn't a county administrator, but there was a county clerk. And requests came through him, but there was also a great deal of individual involvement with the commissioners themselves. If a department director so wanted it. Of course, I was like a puppy, just panting after them all the time, because they let me.
Yeah.
So I took advantage of that. And I don't know that that's not the best way to go about doing things, of course, but it worked. So there was a great deal of personal involvement with the commission chairman and with other commissioners individually. And there was communication through the county clerk's office, and all requests formally came through there.
Mhm.
And then you would work with various departments, personnel, you know, whatever department you had to work with.
Mhm.
George Chandler and I were side by side in budget preparation. We
Mhm.
had to be. Well, I don't know whether George thought that way, but I did. You know, I panted after George, trying to, you know, let's get together. What are you going to do? So I'll know what I have to do, kind of thing.
That was with the construction.
Yeah, and George was wonderful, and George just made it all worthwhile. I learned so much from him. He was so easygoing, and I was so type A that he really settled me down, and he gave me an education on how to deal with the county.
Uh-huh.
And the advice that he gave me was good advice. So we had a good relationship.
What was that advice?
Oh, well, there were a lot of pieces,
Okay.
and the little tiny things here and there. What you need to do to get this is X. You know, here's how you need to go about it with this person, and here's how you need to go about it with this one,
Mhm.
kind of thing. So, and he wasn't the only one that gave me those pieces of advice, but I don't know. It was fascinating to me, and I loved that environment. I knew it wasn't probably the best way for a government to run at the time, to have department heads go to each commissioner individually.
Mhm.
But it was great, you know, for me. I liked it a lot.
Huh.
And then there were department meetings, and everybody communicated that way, and it somehow fell into place. And then working with SCS, but that's pretty much how I operated. And I leaned on the commission chairman a great deal
Mhm.
because he let me.
Mhm.
This was his baby. He was responsible for it being here. It was his baby. He did it.
Yeah.
He made it happen.
Yeah, and that guy was Jim Holland.
Jim Holland, yeah. Of course, he was the principal antagonist about the unification process. So he made considerable enemies in this community who saw to it that he got taken down politically. But of course, anybody who makes a deep impression or does anything worthwhile generally does get canned one way or the other, or tarred and feathered. But that's how it was, and that's how it worked, and it worked well. And then the county ultimately in the, I guess it was 80. Oh gosh, it was earlier than that. It was 82, 83. Hired Roger Alderman,
Mhm.
who was the first county administrator. And we have an annex courthouse because of him. He was a troubleshooting kind of manager. He would go from place to place, and he was trained to be a troubleshooter, which I didn't know, but he explained it to me. He would go from place to place, and he would stir up a hornet's nest in a place and get big things done, and then he would go somewhere else. And that's the way these guys, some of them, are trained to operate. So go from place to place, shake things up, get good positive planning in place, major infrastructure taken care of, get an organizational structure going with the government, ruffle everybody's feathers up, make everybody mad, and then go somewhere else and get them going. And that's the go in and get it done management principle, and everybody hates you, and then you leave and start all over again somewhere else. But somehow that's a planning principle in training for managers in the public sector.
Interesting.
It's a whole section of public management that you can emphasize. It's a specialty.
Huh. And where else did,
And
where
I think
did he go to?
it's my belief that Al Crace was one of those. He never talked about it openly, but I think he was that type of manager too. He came in with the city of Athens. He went from city of Athens to the county, and then he went from here to Gainesville. He stayed there, shook everybody up. Gainesville's beautiful now. Gainesville is beautiful. Downtown Gainesville is like never before. He walks into a place, it blooms, and then he leaves and goes someplace else. And then he went from Gainesville to Jackson County, and then I don't know where he is now, but he's left Jackson County.
Huh.
But no, Jackson County now has drainage. They have a public works department that has principals. They have a planning office. They have all these things that they didn't have before. But anyway, that's the type of manager Roger Alderman was, and that was in the early 80s. So they came about in the early 80s and became a professional government. They hired Culpeper, John Culpeper, who turned their financial situation into a dream. And they had a complete reorganizational structure, and off they went, and they were recognized nationally. So it became the way to go about business, to go through the county administrator. It was much easier to do business that way. It's far less strenuous. It's much more professional, and much better way to communicate.
Yeah, and when you say professional, that's as opposed to sort of the old boy network.
Well, it was a growing government.
Okay.
And it had come out of the dark ages from farmers with overalls that came to board meetings in their overalls and honked into their bandanas while they were doing county business and made decisions on the spot in public meetings, to a government that was entirely and completely professional, and they did all of this in a period of about 10 years. You know, it's a magnificent transformation. I was lucky enough to be right in the middle of it. It was grand. I loved it.
That's interesting.
It was quite an experience. And it taught how people can grow and evolve and change, to how flexible people who are true leaders can be open-minded and change for the good. And Jim Holland was such a man. But anyway, it was good times. It was transitional times, and it was good to be a part of that. It's frustrating in some regards, but it was a good thing to be a part of. And it was a time of growth. It was a time of professionalism, and I enjoyed it very much. It was the kind of job to have. It was the kind of situation to be in where you didn't care how much money you made. Of course, I probably was a complete fool, but it didn't matter. My compensation was the rewards of the job. And I was very fortunate to have had a job like that I could love that much. And everybody in the government seemed to enjoy that too. They loved their work.
What were those rewards of the job?
Growth, sensible growth, support for the principles. When a political body sits before a professional under their employ who has attempted to do their job professionally, in other words, you do all the research, you plan, you look at other places, you decide based upon public demand, you do your homework. Before you walk in and ask for $50,000 for something, you do your research. And when you go before this public body with your request for that much additional money, over 150 or 200 or 300 or whatever it is, and they sit there and they ask you, they grill you with questions that you must answer professionally, and you must support your answer with facts, with data. And you give them this. It gives you an opportunity to prove the need, so that you know by answering them that they understand that you've done your homework, that they understand the principles upon which you are building your case. Not just that they're supporting you, they're supporting the principles that are coming out of your mouth because they care enough to ask you. Who says you're going to make $200,000 a year off of this? Well, sir, And you give them the history of who you met with and where you went, and look at this budget and looked at that budget and looked at this service and that service and this population and this amount of space devoted to this, and how much money they take in per annum based upon their demands. And they listen to this and they make their decision, and they either say yes or no. In my case, they never said no. And you can't, well, maybe you can imagine the enormous professional satisfaction it gives you to know that they're listening to you as a professional. They're testing you to make sure that you're a professional, so that when you walk out of the room, you know that they know you're a professional and that you've done your homework, and they've said yes because of that. And you go out feeling a mile high for what you do. And that's the way they work. The government now, after 1991, one of the biggest complaints the first 5 years was that the public, the commissioners, the politicians, had an open public disdain for department heads. And you would go to a public meeting and you would listen to these commissioners browbeat department heads in public meetings until you would just want to throw up. They didn't listen to their professional staff about any matter. It was horrible, and everybody talked about it, and the politicians hated the department heads, and the department heads hated the government. So things kind of went on hold for a while. I mean, things went on and they rock along, and what happens in a situation like that is you get this mediocrity that emerges.
Yeah.
That's disgusting. This enough to get by crap. But they would call in experts to discuss whether to do this or that, or whether to adopt this ordinance or that ordinance. And they would spend days and weeks with these experts talking about what they needed to do, and then they would completely ignore them in their final decision, because they had already made up their minds what they wanted to do before they even called the experts in. And they did this time and time again, adopting ordinances for the new government. And of course, everything that was useful or unuseful in the old county government was completely trashed and ignored, and some things were changed just for the sake of change. So it was a bad situation for about 5 or 6 years there. And I resigned as a result of it. That wasn't why I came to work. I didn't come to sit and not make waves and collect my paycheck and go home.
And that was in 1996.
Mhm.
You resigned.
Yeah. I'd had quite enough of it at that point.
What size staff did you have at that point?
Well, the department included all the arts facilities too. I don't know. I can't remember. 30-something.
Okay. For the whole,
30-something, I would say. And then, of course, that went up to 50-something in the spring and summer season with temporaries.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a pretty fair-sized department, arts and environmental education.
Okay. And that at that time, there was arts and environmental education, then there was recreation that was separate. Is that still?
And the arts, wanted they came forth with that, and supportive, political support of merging the two departments came when the arts people came forth and put pressure on the commissioners. Well, if you're going to have a separate department for recreation, then we want our own department too. There should be 3 departments, not 1, 3. There should be an environmental department, and there should be an arts department, and there should be a recreation department. Well, that's completely unreasonable in most people's minds, and they went, wait a minute, let's do a master plan, let's merge all these departments. Let's hire an architect to do our bidding for us, and that's what they did, and behold the Department of Leisure Services.
Okay, so that's how
That's how it is now.
developed,
There's
and
one
that's how
department, and it's called Leisure Services. They named it Leisure Services because they didn't want anybody to think recreation or environmental education or arts. They wanted all of it to be leisure services,
Hmm.
things that we do in our spare time.
Was that,
Things that we do when we're not having to do anything important.
That's right.
Things that we do on our vacation. Leisure services. Oh. Anyway, I turned in my resignation.
Yeah, and what, did it become the Department of Leisure Services?
It did?
Before
Yeah.
you
it
resigned?
did.
Okay.
No, after.
After you
shortly.
resigned. Okay,
After.
okay.
Shortly after.
Yeah, sure.
When I resigned, they merged them. The day I resigned, departments were merged.
Really?
I was the only female department head in the government,
Huh.
in the government,
Huh.
that wasn't elected. There were a couple of elected department heads, but I was the only non-elected department head in the government.
Why do you think that was?
Because this is, I got my own theories about that I'll keep to myself. It was very difficult, and the only thing I could tell you to get a perspective on where I'm coming from is to talk to other women who were department heads in the government and talk to them about sexual discrimination.
Hmm.
Then you can talk to them about that for hours and hours, but I'm not going to talk to you about it on tape.
That's fine. We don't have to go.
There were a lot of, I will tell you that when I resigned, there were a lot of women leaders in this community who were very angry with me for not fighting.
Hmm.
So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
But that was the issue. That was the central issue, is why the Department of Arts and Environmental Education was created.
Yeah.
Was because there was a female department director
I see.
that they had to contend with.
Hmm. So it seems to me that, from what you say, over time it went from really almost an ideal situation, about the best situation that I think I've heard of in a local government, to
Well, I don't know that I would put that word on it. No.
okay, well, but
Not
some a
ideal.
very
No.
a very good situation.
It was ideal for
comparatively.
me, but I was
Okay.
crisis oriented.
Okay.
So it was challenging to me. It was
Okay.
mentally and professionally
Okay.
challenging, and I thrived on it.
Yeah, yeah.
And there were setbacks, sure.
All right.
I would never say ideal.
Okay.
No. It was ideal for me personally. But ideal conditions for the system, no, no. But steadily improving, steadily and undauntedly improving for the better of the people who live here.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good thing
Mm-hmm.
overall,
Mm-hmm.
which is not to say it wasn't frustrating.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It seems that it went from that to really not as good a situation, to put it lightly. And what was the turning point in that,
And
from the good to the bad in the county government?
I couldn't off the top of my head pinpoint a turning point. I don't think it was anything specific that was that pivotal.
Yeah.
Not anything. No, I don't know. It's a transition. There was a major transition in government, and that affected a lot of things. Some good, some bad. I did not enjoy working in a jurisdiction where I was expected to not grow. I was expected to go along with everything the government wanted, just to be nice and quiet and stay out of the newspaper and don't get private nonprofit groups all stirred up. Keep the monkey off our backs, collect your paycheck, go dance in your tulips, and leave us alone. I didn't enjoy working for that. It wasn't my cup of tea to collect a paycheck for doing nothing.
Yeah.
So I didn't. I quit.
Yeah.
Went into business for myself.
Yeah.
And I could challenge myself.
And that's when you opened your nursery
Mm-hmm.
right across the road.
Yeah. I think that if I had resigned in 1981, they would have created the Department of Leisure Services in 91.
Oh, okay.
Immediately
91,
upon transition of
After the
governments, they
merger,
would have
yeah.
they would have merged the departments instantly. But I held out, and they didn't want to, I don't know. It was a dynamic issue,
Yeah. Hmm.
but it was a good thing to be a part of. That was a big learning experience for me. And for the rest of the staff, it was an entirely frustrating experience, and that was a part of my decision too, is that the staff was exhausted with this whole fall apart, start over again business, and all they were trying to do was their job. And they got jerked into this because I didn't leave anybody out of anything. I gave them my perspective on everything. The county administrator hated me. I would see something wrong principally, and I would go immediately to a nonprofit board and I would spell it out for them. And then they would start arguing and going to the commissioners, and then the county administrator would jump my ass and delete that. Delete that, please.
I can't do it now, but I will.
I want you to do it now.
Actually, I don't think there's a way to do it now
Okay.
with that, but
Okay.
I will make sure to.
Take that out, please.
That doesn't end up on the.
That does not end up on the tape. And I was not one to think that I worked for the government. I
Yeah.
worked for the people of Athens, and I was constantly compromised in that,
Yeah.
because I would lean on professional nonprofit organizations with things that I knew were wrong.
Yeah.
If I knew it was wrong for something to happen, I would go and I would tell people who supported the principles upon which the whole system was based, and I would tell them, this is wrong. And if it was a political decision, they would jump on the politicians, saying you're compromised, you've been compromised, or some point in between the department head and you, there's been a compromise, and it was with the county administrator, who, well, I won't get into that, but some things they got changed at this level. Before they even got to the commissioners, they would be changed. So there was no communication between the departments and the commissioners. It was all changed at the administrative level, and then presented to the commissioners with no explanation. And therein lay the problem for the parks, because here you had an administration who didn't believe in parks unless they were sports complexes or golf courses, because that was recreation. That was all there was to it.
Yeah.
And the woods were for cutting down and building things on, and that was the administration of the new government. So if you tried to get from here to here with something, you had this cutting you off in the middle. So you had no way to get to them. So how you got to them with the truth was you went to your nonprofits, who didn't have to deal with this middleman, and they would go directly here with your problem. And I nearly got fired for that.
Really?
They had commissioners attending my nonprofit meetings just to see what was going on. Yeah, I had commissioners assigned to go to meetings where I was going to speak because they knew I was going to bring something up.
Wow.
And I'd do it anyway. Because it was the truth, and I didn't have any reason to hide the truth, and if they wanted to fire me, that was fine too. But they weren't going to do that because I was the only. And that's the truth. And everybody recognized that as an opportunity to get the truth to the commission, because they knew that I didn't care whether I was being compromised or not. So they went directly to the commission, and they protected me in the bargain for being their agent of delivering the truth. And that got to be a real headache.
Okay.
And it didn't engender me to the commission either.
I wouldn't imagine.
No, well, it did to some of them, but not the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah, you win 2 or 3, but you don't get the whole group. Not doing that, not doing it that way. And it was underhanded, I agree, but I didn't care about that. I wanted the truth getting where it needed to go. And I didn't apologize for that, and I don't to this day. So, but it got to be a real problem because the man I had to answer to, and I just didn't see eye to eye about anything. And I just thought, well, he left before I did. But I'd had enough. I was exhausted, and I left right after he did.
When you talk about the nonprofits that you went to, what nonprofit organizations were they?
Specifically the Nature Center Board when it came to parks.
Okay.
Yeah. And there was a Linden House Board too, and they were expanding. They had a project going, and they wanted to do things their way. And then there was the Morton Theater Board too, but all of those boards had to be taught how to communicate with the government. They didn't like me standing in the way. I mean, I was given orders, they communicate through you. But they didn't listen to that. They didn't like me because I was trying to tell them that they couldn't talk to their commissioners. Well, screw you, little girl. We'll talk to whoever we want to. So I didn't get off on the right foot with those groups. And I had an administrator who did not support me with those groups. He would take their side against me, make matters worse. And that was fine too. I mean, he was trying to get rid of me. He was trying to get me to leave on my own. But I shouldn't have gone into that. I mean, you need to get rid of that too. I don't need to get into that.
Okay.
Reasons why you resigned, some of which you can talk about, and some of which you can't.
Okay. Well, you'll get the transcript, and you can.
I can edit it.
You can talk about what doesn't go on the public copy.
All right.
After you did resign, you ended up starting up a native plant nursery. Who were your clients for that? I'm just kind of curious to know who in the area.
The Athens-Clarke County government
Really?
was my primary
Really?
employer.
So you essentially became a contractor with Athens?
Well, there were nurseries I sold to. I sold to area retail nurseries.
Yeah.
And I sold to organizations, and there were hundreds of my plants planted along the Greenway, which was why I spent a lot of time with Athens-Clarke County.
Yeah.
Because they needed native landscape materials for the Greenway.
Yeah.
Which was good, and for the new Nature Center building.
Yeah.
So that was fine. That worked out well. And I did a lot of business out of state and out of the county. Other than Athens-Clarke County, most of my business is out of county. Some surrounding counties, and some with the Wildlife Federation and other nurseries and individuals sometimes. And it was good. It was brutal. I thought I worked hard for the government. I had no idea what work was until I opened my own business.
Physical work?
Physical and time consuming.
Yeah.
It was 7 days a week, 14, 15 hours a day.
Yeah.
And it was 10 years of operation, and during the 10 biggest drought years Southeast has ever seen. Yeah. So it was perfectly timed with the drought.
You just got lucky.
Which we had a good well, really good well, but it was constant. It was 2 and 3 times a day watering everything.
I bet, yeah.
And if you do it right, you do it by hand. So I did it by hand, and my brother and I were in business together, and that was a big mistake. Why am I talking about that?
Oh, I was just asking about that.
Oh, okay.
Generally, wondering what you did. The whatever
I
happened
don't
to
think
you.
the Russell Research Center needs to know about my career.
They probably don't, but I just figured it flushes the character out of it, I suppose. So if someone's curious to know. Do you come back to visit the park?
Not very often. I do more now than I used to.
Now you've got a little more time, I guess.
I was always trained, and I guess it's natural for me. Once you've left a place, you're gone. Go something else.
Yeah.
I don't look back much. much. I'm not one to do that. So I married an Athens man, and he didn't, which is the only reason I'm even here.
Yeah.
He is an Athens boy, born and raised, and I didn't go anywhere after I left. Otherwise, I would have. I had been married to him.
Yeah.
Living somewhere besides here was not an option. Otherwise, I would have pursued my career elsewhere. I would have moved on. But I don't look back. Never did. Not one to do that. This process is a little uncomfortable to me because I haven't done. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4, I would not have been able to do it because it's taken some time for me to get around some of the things that really hurt and were disappointments to me. And then watching this park go downhill and living right next to it is painful. So I don't come up here too often. Yeah, it's a matter of attitude. It's a matter of when you're finished with someplace, you go somewhere else. Go somewhere else and start over, which I couldn't do, but would have. I hope things change for the better with a better balanced government to meet all of people's needs equally well, without compromising anything. And I'm willing to pay higher taxes to do that. That was another reason why I could always speak out, because I was a taxpayer here too.
Yeah.
And that's supposed to give you some credence. But I hope it changes. It's my understanding that it takes 20 years, quarter of a century for a change that significant in an organizational structure of government to become completely effective.
Yeah.
It takes that long for the change to settle down into some level of comfort for the community. That's the way it's happened in other places that have done this. Columbus, Muskogee, and there are several other governments that have unified, and they've had a lot of trouble in the transition, and that's understandable. So perhaps with time things will be a little bit better balanced.
Yeah.
I think there are some commissioners now who are realizing the importance of open space, and they're fighting for it, and they don't let anybody forget about it. And I think they have an enormous amount of courage, in that they're not into politics because of their egos or because they want to make money off of it. They're in it because of what they believe, and that's really encouraging to see that kind of public official come into this government and stand up for principles.
That adds some emphasis to it, doesn't it?
I didn't mean it. No, there were a couple who were really outspoken
Really?
for the environment, and that's good. I mean, that's a good thing.
Yeah, that's good.
Of course, we're way behind other places, but we're still making progress. They have a whole party for the environment in Tasmania. I mean, a political party. Jesus.
Goodness.
I hate to be in buildings like this during this kind of storm.
Yeah, I know what
because
you
you're
mean.
on a
It's kinda
slab and you're right out in the open.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, we're about done. Did you have anything to add?
No, I guess my last statement summed it up pretty
Okay.
much. Is that, maybe we're headed in the right direction.
Yep.
Maybe we'll get balanced, and maybe we'll put more support into all the things that people need and not just a few. The trouble with the environment is that once you've screwed it up, it's gone. And it takes a century for it to turn around again. But if you got buildings there, it's not going to turn around and come back for you. It's gone forever. And the species that live there are gone forever. And it's another link in the chain that we depend on to hold us up. So, it's time And the government, I think, is going to look at these things, and already is, because they're making buffer ordinances. They're protecting the river corridors now, not without some public pressure to do so, but they are protecting the river corridors against development, and that's a good start in the right direction. And it's because we've got leaders who are not afraid to speak up and take the lead on that issue. And maybe it'll get even better. And that's it.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That's been really good.